Hello, and welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. I am Eric Miskell with EMS Now, and today I get to speak with David Loftus, the president and CEO of ECIA, as you can see there above his head, the Electronic Component Industry Association. David, I've been looking forward to talking to you. We've picked an interesting topic, which we'll get into in a moment. But before we do that, you kind of have a rich industry history. So why don't you introduce yourself, your background, and what your current role is with the ECIA?
Sure, thanks, Eric. Pleasure to be here today. I started out in this industry as an engineer. I was a design engineer for a number of years and was intrigued by semiconductors and got over into the semiconductor side of the business in the early 90s, first as a field apps engineer, and then grew my way through the sales ranks and took a tour of duty in Asia, running Asia Pacific for Xilinx. Came back, ran to Silicon Valley, ran a couple of product lines for the company. Was vice president, general manager, and running a big P&L and R&D teams and so forth. And then I got back onto the sales and marketing side for about the last 10 years of my career and ran worldwide sales and marketing for 3 different semiconductor companies. So I retired from Silicon Valley at the end of 2019. And right as the pandemic hit, somebody talked me into taking the reins at ECIA. And I really love this role. I call it my retirement hobby. It's a wonderful way for me to be able to stay in touch with a business that I love and to be able to give back to a business that has been very, very good to me for well over 3 decades. So, ECIA is focused on a number of things. Number one, it's about trying to pull together hundreds of companies in the electronic component supply chain, manufacturers, distributors, independent manufacturers, rep firms, to be able to collaborate on best practices, to be able to address issues that affect the industry, including the topic that we're going to be talking about today, and to really try to help the industry be more efficient and effective. We also sponsor a number of trade shows and events. We manage a lot of standards for the industry. We also do a lot of original market research around supply and demand, lead times, and we also run an authorized distribution website for EMS and other customers of the electronic supply chain to be able to be assured that they're buying only fully authorized and fully genuine product. There's a lot of inventory websites out there today, and we are the only one that is founded by authorized distributors for authorized manufacturers to be able to provide that single source of availability and pricing for truly fully genuine product in the industry.
And that's the Trusted Parts website.
That's trustedparts.com. Yes, thanks.
Exactly. Good. Well, listen, as you've alluded to, and I did the tease here about what we're going to talk about today, and that is the NCNR. And this is a term that's been a major point of contention, it seems like, in our industry of late. And I think to a degree it's misunderstood. And so I wanted to speak to you about that and what it really means, and maybe get your views and some advice for companies who are struggling with this. So maybe begin with explaining NCNR from the perspective of the manufacturer and the distributors.
Okay, great. Well, everyone knows NCNR, non-cancellable, non-returnable, and I agree that it's been a frustration, especially here in the last couple of years, and a source of misunderstanding, I think, between manufacturers, distributors, and customers. And I'll say, you know, I spent most of my semiconductor career on the sales and marketing side, and I was the guy usually on the front lines, taking the incoming fire from customers when they're frustrated with NCNR. So, you know, this is one that I think that there's, again, a lot of misunderstanding that I hope to be able to share a little bit of insight. You know, I start off by saying most manufacturers and distributors don't implement NCNR on everything that they do in normal times on mainstream product when supply and demand are in reasonable balance. In say normal times when the industry is not capacity constrained, there are some situations where NCNR is warranted. It's usually when there is custom product, semi-custom product, very old product, especially if it's been obsoleted by a manufacturer, something that's really slow moving. And the reason there is around the fact that manufacturers have to build a minimum order quantity, whether they're running it through their own fabs, whether they're running it through TSMC, UMC, or one of the other many foundries out there. They're usually having to run 25 wafers in a lot. And that lot then has to be tested, diced, packaged, inventoried, and then potentially shipped on, hopefully shipped on to an end customer. And when something's a slow moving product, manufacturers really need to be able to put NCNR terms in place to be able to make sure that they're going to be able to ship the bulk of that product that has been manufactured. There's actually a benefit in that to the end customer. If a manufacturer does not know they are going to be able to ship through all of that quantity, they're going to have to price it in a way that expects some kind of waste or product that is unsold. And so putting NCNR terms in place with a customer helps really demonstrate that customer is serious about taking that product eventually from the manufacturer. It doesn't all have to be at once. A lot of times it can be scheduled over many months or even many years. But that NCNR and the schedule that it puts in place gives that manufacturer the assurance that they know that they can ship it through. They may have to sit on the product for a while until they eventually ship it to a customer, but at the same time, they don't have to build in an adder for the amount of product that would be wasted if that NCNR order were not in place. Okay. So, you know, those cases are really a minority, a very small percentage, especially for the companies that I work for in my career, very small percentage in normal business cycles where you have reasonable balance between supply and demand, and normal terms are prevailing. You know, again, manufacturers want and distributors want to be able to provide the flexibility for customers. They want to normally provide 30-day cancellation window. They want to provide flexibility for push outs and reschedules to be able to accommodate their customers' fluctuations. They don't necessarily want to force a customer to adhere to the original order line items verbatim. They want to be able to have that flexibility to be able to show and demonstrate the customer service that they can provide. At the same time, you know, these NCNR terms are put in place just to for really an element of assurance. And so I'll turn here for a second just to address what's happened here in the last couple of years. So
actually, can I ask for a clarification on something too? So is the NCNR term is one that only the manufacturer specifies, not the distributor? Or can a distributor specify it?
No, the distributor can specify it, and I'll tell you that it's actually not just an electronic components manufacturer that specifies it. A very important point for customers to understand is that NCNR terms many times get placed upon the electronic components manufacturer by upstream suppliers. And so a lot of that is getting pushed downhill to be able to ensure that those terms are consistent throughout the supply chain. So TSMC, as most people know, the largest semiconductor foundry in the world, is what was very much capacity constrained during the pandemic. And they have been a few times in their history, as was Samsung, as was UMC, as was Fujitsu, as was, many of the foundries. And those foundries, similar situation to the manufacturers, if they want to ensure that the orders that they're taking are actually going to get shipped to those customers, and they're not going to waste that really valuable manufacturing capacity, they put NCNR terms in place with semiconductor OEMs. And in fact, it can be more than just on a single order. A lot of times when foundries get constrained, they put in place even more onerous terms on the semiconductor manufacturers that are called take or pay, meaning that you have to book a certain amount of capacity, sometimes a year to 18 months out in advance, and with inability to be able to reschedule. And if you don't take that product, you pay for that product. That's so it's a huge capital commitment up front that is actually a liability on the balance sheet. So in certain terms, those NCNR terms from upstream suppliers get passed along. And so distributors are part of that supply chain. If a manufacturer is facing NCNR from upstream suppliers, they're usually going to pass some of that along to end customers and to their distributors. And then the distributors are likewise forced to be able to pass that along to the end customer.
The end customer. And of those, let me just dig in a little more too, because this is interesting. We're talking about at the semiconductor level. So when we're talking about NCNR, is that mostly applied to A items, the active items? For the other things, because distributors, of course, handle a whole slew of things, not, A, Bs, and Cs, to be very generic here. Is this mostly a term that's applied to the A items then?
It's applied. Well, let's go back. What I said before was that in normal business conditions, when we've got balance between supply and demand, it's usually like C-level items and beyond that there's NCNR. It's really stuff that is that's more on the obscure side of the product portfolio, or very custom, and could be very high volume, but it's usually for one or just a couple of customers that have the bulk of the buys on those products. When we get to a supply constrained situation, then absolutely it moves into the A list items, because they represent a huge bulk of the volume. And that volume, if you are limited in your capability to produce product, you want to make sure that you're doing the best job serving the needs of as many customers as possible. And putting NCNR terms in place for a certain set of customers or certain set of products means that they know that they're going to be able to deliver that product to those customers, but it also means that they're also going to be able to service a broader set of customers as well, especially in those A-list items. When you have a tier one customer, a very big, systems OEM, an Apple, Samsung, Huawei, somebody that's taken a lot of volume from you, you want to be very clear with them what capacity you have, what delivery commitments you want to that you can stick to, and you want to then understand exactly how much capacity you have left for your B and C level items to be able to service on the broader market.
Okay. And, on the custom part, what percentage generally is considered custom in this? Is this 10, 15%? Is it,
That's a great question, and it varies wildly by manufacturer. If you take a broadline analog company like an Analog Devices or TI, they ship a very, very broad portfolio, and they don't tend to do that much custom product for a specific customer. Now, there are certain cases, there are manufacturers that do audio chips for handsets, and there's one audio chip company who more than half of their business is with one company that starts with the letter A in Cupertino, California, and the vast majority of that of their product portfolio and their shipments is custom. So if the extremes are, in some cases it can be on a very broad line, a supplier like a TI or an ADI, it could be it's probably down in single digits what is custom or semi-custom product. In some cases that are delivering the vast majority of their product to very high volume verticals and specific ASSPs, application specific standard products, though then a very high percentage of their product can be considered custom or semi-custom, and will likely have much tighter terms and conditions associated with those orders.
And so when a distributor receives the product from the manufacturer, if the manufacturer has not handed down NCNR terms with that product, does the distributor have the discretion to apply it or not?
They do. Typically, a distributor is going to try to provide even more flexibility than a manufacturer's terms and conditions. That's why they're in business. That's why customers buy from them. That's why manufacturers employ them. Distributors are a inventory pool that can be shared amongst many customers, and they want to be able to provide that flexibility to be able to demonstrate their value in the supply chain. There are probably some very limited instances where a distributor might choose to be able to implement NCNR terms when a manufacturer has not implemented those on the buy to them. And that's usually in a case where they have, say, bought a significant amount of product from a manufacturer, especially in the cases of E&O, excess and obsolete situations, where the distributor then is sitting on a much larger pool of inventory that they want assurance that is going to move. They may decide that they want to put NCNR terms, and especially cases where it is an E&O distributor like a Rochester or maybe even a Flip Electronics, where they're dealing in a product that has a limited number of homes and a limited life cycle and a limited amount of product that is left to be shipped, and they may be trying to service multiple customers with that limited amount of product that's left. and they may put NCNR terms in place. But by and large, distributors do provide more flexibility than the manufacturer. Their T's and C's, their minimum order quantities are going to be much more flexible than a manufacturer, because it serves the needs of both the distributor's customer and the needs of the manufacturer to be able to provide that extra level of service.
Yeah. You just mentioned the T's and C's there. Is there, clearly they're not all the same, right? So you're smiling. So what is some, maybe compare and contrast some of what the industry has there?
Sure. So again, it really comes back to how custom the product is, how, I guess, aggressive a manufacturer wants to be in pursuing a customer, how aggressive that customer is, and how much leverage that customer has from the buying side. Typically, an A-list customer, a tier 1 customer that is doing very high volume direct with a manufacturer, there is usually a contract with some level of customized terms and conditions that are agreed on between buyer and seller, and that can have anything to do with pricing to delivery commitments. Those delivery commitments can have late delivery penalties. They can have upside commitments and buffer stock and things like that. It can, and they even include usually a force majeure clause, which became quite the issue with the pandemic. So only a couple of times in my career has a force majeure clause been invoked. But as you probably know, in late 2020, when we're a capacity constrained industry, when there's very uncertain economic conditions, a lot of these contracts that were written between manufacturers and customers, the manufacturers chose to invoke that force majeure clause, because certainly the pandemic was something that was beyond all parties' controls. It affected the supply chain dramatically, everything from raw materials to logistics, and in those cases, most manufacturers and supply chain partners decided to invoke those force majeure clauses to be able to provide some relief from, in some cases, very tight T's and C's on that contractual relationship.